Folsom was one of the first western cities to have a railroad connection, making it an important element of our town's history. On today's episode of the Folsom History Show, we interviewed the manager of our local railroad museum, Bill Anderson.
My name is Bill Anderson. I'm one of the curators here to preserve Folsom's rich railroad history. Folsom was the first railroad town west of the Mississippi River, right after the gold rush. So many people lived here. Not all got their gold, but they needed transportation, and the first railroad in the West ran from Sacramento to Folsom, right here, right where we're standing. To my left shows what the railroad activity was in the United States back in 1860. Now that's 4 years after this railroad was built. A lot of activity on the East Coast. And once you'll see here on the map, you'll see 22 miles of railroad track from Sacramento to Folsom. Here we have a diorama we've just begun on the railroad block here, where the turntable and the terminus of the Folsom Sacramento Valley Railroad, as it was in the 1860s to 80s. Although we're a railroad museum, there has been a lot of interest in the local bridges in Folsom. For instance, the trestle bridge that went across the river to carry the trains to Roseville and Lincoln. The truss bridge that was originally here, moved up to Northern California, way up north, to the Walker River, I believe, and returned. It is now called the Walker Bridge, of course, and is used for pedestrians and cyclists. The railroad shops here, of course, were built from brick, used quite extensively, and but once the Transcontinental Railroad was being created in Sacramento, these buildings, brick shop buildings, were taken down.
Bill went on to describe how pioneers recycled everything they could, as new material wasn't always readily available,
and moved a short distance to where Folsom Powerhouse is today. Recycling at its best. Here we have a display of different sections of railroad track, actually from different foundries over the period of time. The top piece was cast in Cardiff, Wales. It was used on the California Central Railroad as it crossed the river here to go to Roseville. Here we have engineer Theodore DeHone Judah, the gentleman who built the Sacramento Valley Railroad. He came from Boston, the East Coast, along with his wife, who assisted him in doing surveys of the Sacramento Valley Railroad. Here we have the map, Theodore Judah's map of the Sacramento Valley Railroad, beginning in Sacramento, coming up where Folsom Boulevard is today, nearby. The destination actually was Negro Bar. Theodore Judah, also known as Crazy Judah, because of his desire to build a railroad across country with a transcontinental railroad. He said, "You'll never do it. You're crazy." William Tecumseh Sherman, who you would call was big in the Civil War and other wars prior. 1855, there were no wars. General Sherman was the first vice president of the Sacramento Valley Railroad. He was a banker in San Francisco and an investor. And then Charles Lincoln Wilson was the first president of the Sacramento Valley Railroad. The town of Lincoln, north of Roseville, was named after Charles Lincoln Wilson. Here we have a specimen of the first rail in the West. It all came from England by ship around Cape Horn through San Francisco Bay and dropped off at Sacramento and built from Sacramento to Folsom, right here. Our bottom shelf here depicts items found when we uncovered the historic railroad turntable. There were railroad spikes, pipes from the Chinese. Here we have a log of a snow report taken at Donner Summit. Had a record depth of 819 inches in 1937-38 winter. Quite a record at that time. That's 60-some feet of snow, all accumulated over the year. Here we have an early link and pin coupler. Couplers connected the two train cars together. Today you'll see what we call a knuckle coupler. The link being this part here and the pin here. So when we wanted to connect two cars, one car would back up. The link would be placed between these two, and very carefully this pin would be dropped into the hole and connect with the link. Very dangerous. Men lost fingers and hands in this operation, hence the development of the knuckle coupler, which was a lot safer. Here's the historic Folsom turntable, originally constructed in 1856 along with the Sacramento Valley Railroad. This was the way to move a locomotive and tender, turn it around 180 degrees to head back to Sacramento. It would actually come in, the locomotive would come to the station, disconnect, back up. There was another set of tracks. The locomotive would back up to the other side of the turntable, come onto the turntable, turn the other way 180 degrees, and attach to the back end of the train to go back to Sacramento. This reproduction was built in 1999 on the original pivot stone of the original turntables. There were 5 operational turntables on this very pivot stone over the years. The first one in 1856 was just a flat deck in 40 feet in diameter. Smaller equipment that was sufficient. In 1867, as the equipment got bigger, the turntable was made bigger. This basically is the model of what was here in 1867. We used the plans from that era. There were 5 actual turntables here until 1913, when a Y was built on Folsom Boulevard and Bidwell Street. It's a Y is a triangular shaped set of tracks where they could turn a whole train to go back to Sacramento. So in 1913, this was demolished. The pivot stone was buried and left here till the early 1970s, when it was kind of uncovered to know exactly where it was.
Wow, what an in-depth look at our railroad history. You can catch Bill on the weekends at the museum for only $2 admission, so make sure to check it out next time you're on Sutter Street. As always, thanks for watching the Folsom History Show.